Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Welcome to Comsverse, and session 211, How to Drive Successful Microsoft Teams Adoption in 7 Steps, brought to you with Adam Deltinger. Adam, over to you.
Thank you so much for that, Adrian. So welcome to Comsverse. I hope you had a blast so far. And of course, welcome to my session, How to Drive Successful Microsoft Teams Adoption in 7 Steps. In this session, I'm going to talk about how to do a better implementation of Microsoft Teams, avoiding the most common pitfalls and make your end users more happy, increase usage of the application as well. In this case, I'm focusing mostly on Microsoft Teams, of course, but could actually apply to another implementation or application as well. So just before heading off, I just want to quickly introduce myself a little bit further. My name is Adam Deltinger. I'm a senior IT consultant from Sweden working at ITEA. I'm also a Microsoft Office Apps and Services MVP. I've been working with Microsoft 365 services and user adoption since about 2016. So feel free if you have any questions. Of course, I'll be attending the breakout session room after the session. The link is on the last slide. But if you just want to contact me or reach out to me, feel free to do that on LinkedIn or Twitter or both, of course. Also, I want to thank all the sponsors making this event possible. And big shout out to all the organizers as well. Of course, they've done an amazing job here. And also be aware that every sponsor has their own kind of sponsor booth in the Comsverse team. So make sure to pay a visit there. You can talk to the sponsors. You can schedule meetings with them. You have the opportunity to win swag and stuff like that. So make sure you do that. All right, so let's start off. So being an employee myself, I have many times received an email saying, "Oh, hey, we have this new application rolling out." In the mail, there's some information, some links to some documentation, and maybe some how-to guides, right? And this can apply to all sorts of apps and services like time reporting tools, ticket management systems, OneDrive or Microsoft Teams, of course. So later, this application was rolled out, and I found myself never really keen to use it. It almost felt like I was being forced into using this application. And each time I had to use the application, I had to look for that email on how to do things, or maybe even worse, ask a coworker for the 6th time what button to click or how to do things, So I used the application because I had to, not because I really wanted to, right? So why do this really happen? For sure, am I a lazy person? No, yes, okay, I'm a lazy person, but there are more to it. Because no one really told me, how this app or upgrade or whatever it is benefited me in my work. I'm sure this tool was better, had better features and so on, but no one really told me about them or even gave me an interest of finding them out for myself. So this is already off, as you can see, as a bad start, and this is not how to do it, and it's not a good adoption strategy, right? So when I talk about adoption, what do I mean by it? Like, what does it mean to me? It's a very common word nowadays, and Microsoft is focusing heavily on it, creating tons of great content around this for you to use. So why now, you might think? If you look back some years ago, we had a more easily controlled work environment. People had a computer at their desktop with a bunch of group policy objects limiting what users could do, right? Then there was a corporate firewall which controlled what services and data we could use, both internally and externally. And it was easy for IT departments to make us use the tools and services what they wanted us to use. But nowadays we have something called, modern workplace, digital workplace. It got many names, but many, not all, but many users have a bunch of mobile devices now, all connected to internet and have access to thousands of apps and services. And people can work from everywhere and anytime they want. So it's getting harder for organizations to control these. And of course, you can manage and govern mobile devices too, and many times you should, but more in the perspective of security and governance, not forcing users into using your applications. So it's clear it's far more easy to have your users really wanting to use your applications instead of restricting them to only being able to use them. End users kind of will always find a way or other ways, and that's kind of why we have the term shadow IT. And users will be one step ahead, and IT departments will need to put in so much effort into like keeping up. I mean, they're kind of like hackers, like end users are mini hackers in that sense. So what we need to do instead is to make users aware of our application and gain their interest and curiosity about it. Then they will use it, and our goal is that they will like using it, or even better, love using it, telling other people about it and so forth. When we come to this, we have succeeded, and this is kind of what end user adoption is to me. All right, and before I go into step number 1 here, I just want to say that each of one of these steps will take some time and effort to complete, of course. But I promise if you do all or some of these steps, your chances of success is going to be great. So let's move on to step number 1, collect important information. There can never be too much information, right? So in order to do this, you need to find your adoption stakeholders and do workshops with those. With adoption stakeholders, I refer to people within your organization that knows about your company. That knows your values, that knows the company culture, your processes, and very importantly, your pains as well. You need to know why you're rolling out Microsoft Teams in the first place. When I help customers and ask them these questions, most often 2 reasons come up pretty often. Maybe they say like we use Office 365 for our mails, and we want to start to use other services within the Office 365 suite as well, and that we already pay for. And we hear Microsoft Teams is great. So the other one is we use Skype for Business Online, for example, and that will go end of life, as you certainly heard. Teams is replacing Skype now, so we need to make a move. I mean, those 2 are all valid reasons, of course, but they don't really answer the most important questions. Also, from an end user's perspective, they don't really care about these either. They want to know how they can benefit from something if they're going to learn a new application. The kind of like, what's in it for me? So in these workshops, you need to ask yourself these things. Why use Microsoft Teams? Is Teams really the solution? What parts of Teams do you need, and in what order are you going to implement them? And here's also where the next question comes in, the pains I was talking about. Your adoption stakeholders should be able to tell the pains you and your end users are struggling with. So make sure to identify those and how Teams can help resolve those pains. Quick wins and long-term goals as well. Quick wins are very important because they help end users getting excited and interested in the product. If you identify a user pain within your organization and Teams somehow can fix this without much investment, this is a quick win. So for example, if your end users are struggling with meetings today, and we know that Teams is great to conduct meetings with a lot of features like meeting recordings, simplicity of joining, meeting notes, and so on. All this right there built in, ready for users to start using. So this is kind of a quick win, right? Find all these and give the users that what's in it for me. Also make sure to set the long-term goals as well. What is that you want with this implementation? What do you want this implementation to accomplish? All right, so moving on to step number 2, conduct a pilot. Running a pilot is an important step towards having a successful rollout. How extensive it needs to be depends on the size of the rollout, number of users, number of scenarios you have to test out, and so forth. It might also be done in different steps, depending on if you're doing a full rollout of the bat, so to speak, or in sequences. There might also be more than one pilot group, of course. So this needs to be addressed during the previous workshops or sit down and have new workshops regarding the pilot itself. Doing a pilot is important because you need to know what works and what doesn't work. Implementing Microsoft Teams fully, not knowing this, will probably end up with unsatisfied end users. So you don't want to do that. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what a pilot is all about. So, and also be aware that Microsoft have lots of great content on how to set up and run a pilot. So make sure you dig into that as well. So first of all, pilot a scenario with common variables to the organization as a whole, meaning that things you try out during the pilot should be something that most of your users will be using. Doing a pilot on how salespersons can work more efficiently with leads, for example, yeah, that will benefit your sales departments, but won't do much for the rest of your users. So try to find common ways of work that applies to the masses, so to speak. If you have business processes and business units having very particular processes and way of working, it might be a good idea to make this a kind of a separate pilot as well. All right. So depending on if you're doing like one or several pilots, you need to make sure that you have the right pilot users. If you're doing only one pilot, I'd say it's a good idea to have users from all different parts of your organization. And this way you will find the most do's and don'ts and will be more prepared for a full implementation. And after that, you need to give these pilot users appropriate training. They don't need to be experts, but receive enough training to fulfill their day-to-day work and the tasks they do every day in the way you intended them to be done. So in the pilot, you should try out all these quick wins you found in the initial workshops. Try resolve those pains I was talking about earlier with the help of Microsoft Teams. And overall get feedback throughout the pilot and adjust accordingly. What works and what doesn't work. Some intended ways of working might not cut it. So then you have to go back to the drawing board and try again. Teams is a kind of awesome service that does a lot, right? But it doesn't do everything. And sometimes you find that Teams is just not suitable for what you need. And I also recommend collecting the most common questions you're asked during the pilot, because we will use these later on as well. So to summarize this step, make sure to pilot the right things and have the right users as pilot users. Make sure to try out every scenario and adjust till it just works. All right, step number 3, communication. So now we come to number 3, and I'd say this is one of the most important steps, and it shouldn't be underestimated. It's also important to note here that this step is something you do from start to finish during the implementation. It's not that you do on, you have done the first 2 and now you communicate. You should do this right away. Or better yet, continue on even afterwards. Remember that email I was talking about earlier in the beginning. That's communication, right? But although it's not very good and it's far from enough, communicating with your users about what's going on, how, when, and why is the foundation of good user adoption. As I stated earlier, communicating is something that's supposed to happen before, during, and even after rollout. And yet again here, Microsoft have made lots of material content to use here. Email templates, flyers, and best practice examples. So I've been talking about getting the end users invested in your rollout and in the product you're implementing. And one big part of this is communication. Start informing ahead of time about Microsoft Teams. What is it? What will the implementation look like, for example? And then you describe why you roll out Microsoft Teams and what the high-level gains and benefits are. Then you also explain the personal benefits of Microsoft Teams, that what's in it for me part. You need to get your users interested and create curiosity for Microsoft Teams. And here's also where those pains and quick wins comes into play yet again. So if you can pinpoint an issue a user have and give them a solution for this, you have come a long way already. So during the rollout, keep users aware of what's going on and don't leave them hanging in the dark. Keep building their interest and make them feel they are involved, not forced into something. And furthermore, Teams is also an ever-evolving service, which means that new features are being released all the time. Many of these may improve teamwork, save time, and help users being more effective. So make sure to keep your users in the loop. So my next step will also apply to this. And my next step is continuous learning. And this follows the same track as communication, meaning that this is something you do from the very start and never really stop doing. I've been talking about giving pilot users training, but when the rollout is happening, all users should have some knowledge about how to use Teams. General tutorials and guides can be given to users already before the actual rollout and also during the pilot. But the result of the pilot sets the kind of way of working in place and reflects the more in-depth training. And training can be done in so many ways depending on numerous factors. How many people need training? Location of users, are they spread across many sites, offices, or even countries? Do you have training tools in place that you use, for example? You should preferably use channels for training that users already use. You're of course not limited to one channel, but can use several. So yet again here, Microsoft has put in great effort in creating training materials for Microsoft Teams. So for example, you can start off by sending out some basic how-to emails to your users. If Yammer is used in your organization, make some posts in Yammer about this. This also goes for general communication about the overall implementation as well. So the kind of like communication and training goes a little bit hand in hand here. If you have a learning management system in place, that's a great way of doing training for your users. And in most cases, it's really easy to set up courses and add pre-made content to them already. Having them already up and running like in no time. So make sure to use that if you have that in place. Then you have classroom trainings. They're very effective, but they also require a lot of kind of a set location where users need to go. The scheduling to fit many users at the same place and time, it's really hard. And so this might not be viable for a large organization with lots of users in many locations. But there's also the possibility to have classroom trainings for some groups of users. For example, your champions, which I will discuss in a minute. Also remember that when Microsoft Teams is rolled out, Teams is a great channel itself to get information and training content out to your users. As with communication, training should never really stop, as I already mentioned. So make sure your users are aware of new features and how to use them as well. So with that, I've come to step number 5, which is a champions program. So early in the process of your implementation, you should consider to set up a champion program. First of all, I'm going to just explain what is a champion, right? A champion is someone that will help you spread the word, the knowledge, and the hype around the service or product that you're implementing. They can also be your ears and eyes during and after a rollout to get a sense of your users' thoughts and feelings as well. So you need to get the right people and set up a team of champions. A champion usually looks like a person that is very keen about trying out new things. In this case, loves new technology and are eager to learn and start using it. They typically aren't afraid of change and are often someone that after other people ask for help about tools and technology. This is, however, no rule or a must. I often even advise customers to find these persons with other personalities as well, like something I call the dissenters, users that aren't too happy with change and change their behavior and habits. They're happy with things as they are and want to stick with it. But if you manage to convince these persons that Microsoft Teams is a great tool and how it can benefit themselves and everyone else, your other users will take notice of this and will help you out. Another tip is to find these champions from all corners of your organization. As said, they will help you help users and will be a source of feedback as well. So if they cover your entire organization, it will make sure that all voices will be heard and help is always kind of nearby. And at the same time, they're kind of also your voice, right? So when you've decided on the selected group of champions, you need to make sure they get the appropriate training here as well. And they should know Microsoft Teams pretty well, but not limited to only that. They should also know the goals of the implementation itself, the high-level gains and the personal ones. This way, they also get kind of more involved in the rollout themselves, making them better champions. Also remember those collecting those questions during the pilot I was mentioning. Give your champions the answers to these questions, then preparing them to answer your users' questions when they arise, because the questions that arise during the pilot will probably be asked during the implementation as well. And if your champions have the answers to those questions, they can help you out answering them. Also make sure that your champions know each other and work together as a team. They can help each other out, share ideas and solutions to obstacles some might have run into and found a solution to. And kind of what better way to do this is through Microsoft Teams, right? So set up a champions team in Microsoft Teams, create channels for different topics like issues, questions, general information, and et cetera, et cetera. In here, they can also have recurring meetings where they can share feedback and status with each other if any bigger issues have arisen and how to move forward. And you should also be kind of a part of all or some of these meetings, so you can take action upon the information given if needed. And because your champions are all over your organization, they probably hear what your end users are saying, if they're happy or displeased, for example. So it's important that you are aware how your users feel about using Microsoft Teams in order to take the necessary actions for a successful implementation. All right, so we move on to number 6, which is individual workshops. I've done lots of Microsoft Teams training, including classroom trainings. My classroom trainings are usually about 3 or 4 hours long, and when it's over and people walk out of that door, like, what happens then? It kind of, I've noticed it's business as usual, of course. They go back to work and do what they need to do, right? Therefore, it's also important to time user training in correlation to the implementation itself. So in the best scenario, users have access to Teams by the time of the trainings. Although, even if so, when people are busy, they tend to do things as they are used to and comfortable with, even if they could have been using, Teams, being more faster, better, and more efficient. So user tends to procrastinate and forget. You will, of course, have your champions helping you push users forward, of course, but there's still one dilemma. Every team or business unit work in different ways. They have different tasks overall with different processes, document types, communication forms, and so on. So this means that it will vary a lot how different business units will utilize Teams. So when I talk to my customers sometime after my classroom trainings, for example, I find very often that users now have Teams up and running. They started using it or various parts of it, but they've also come to kind of a halt. This is many times because they have a hard time transforming their old ways of working into doing it with Microsoft Teams instead. Their old processes, maybe file shares with files they don't know how to make a structure of in Teams. They tell me, yeah, we learned about Microsoft Planner, but I can't really figure out how to use it in the best possible way. Also, a note here, business critical processes ought to be a part of the pilot as well here. So what I do here, and I've seen very good results from, is to do individual workshops with various business units. If there are teams working in very similar ways, they can be all part of the same workshops, of course. So sometime after training, I reach out to different functions within the organizations and their team managers, scheduling these workshops. Often like 1 or maybe 2 hours is enough. So most important is that the users attending these workshops knows about their team's processes, way of working, and so on. So while they're in these workshops, I ask them these kind of simple questions. How is it going? Are you using Teams? What obstacles are you running into? I ask them about their specific processes and help them do this with Microsoft Teams right there and then. Sometimes it, of course, requires me to take notes and follow up later on, but most often users just need that final push in to start using Teams fully. One issue I run into often in these workshops is with files. Commonly, they have a file share where the team used to store all the files. And they're now struggling with how to move these files to Microsoft Teams. It's usually just a matter of creating appropriate channels in their team in Teams that corresponds to their folders in their file share. Then they can migrate these files themselves. But things like this keeps them from doing their day-to-day work in Teams. So I try to solve their problems and optimize their workflow, answer specific questions till they feel secure enough to make the leap. And yet again, I've seen some great results and increase in usage after these workshops. So I've come to step number 7, which is measuring usage. Microsoft offers several usage reports that gives you information about how much Teams is used in your organization. Keeping track of the overall usage during and especially after the implementation is valuable to make sure your users use Teams in a sustainable way. Because you don't want Microsoft Teams to be like the new cool tool of the month, and then your users go back to the old ways and behavior. And by checking in on these reports, you make sure that Teams is being used as planned and that usage is increased over time. The rollout of Teams might have been very successful, but it's the outcome of it all that really matters, right? If by any means usage is decreasing, you should take action as soon as possible and find out why and in what way. Meet up with your champions here and hear what they think. Hopefully you've been communicating with them even before usage dropped and found out about any errors, misconfigurations, or unhappy users and taken action upon it. But things can change, and therefore it's important to watch the actual statistics now and then. How often may depend, but I recommend looking at the reports once every other week, just after rollout, and maybe less frequently later on. It often takes a while for users to change their way of working and change overall, but after a while, it sticks. You can find a few reports in the usage reports section in the admin portal. These, as well as a few others, can also be found in Teams Admin Center under Analytics and Reports. This includes usage activity on a user level, which Teams clients uses on which Teams clients they are logging into. PSTN usage and live event usage, for example, and the total activity in Microsoft Teams. How to use and react to these reports, of course, depends on your initial goals on how Teams should be used. So, for example, take the Teams client report. If you have communicated to users to use the mobile client due to the fact that you may have very many mobile users and see that the most users don't do this, they don't use the mobile client, you might have a problem to solve here. It could be due to insufficient information, poor training, or any other reason. So work this out with your adoption stakeholders and champions. So from the Teams client itself, team owners can also get analytics reports based on their team's activity. They can see active users and the total number of messages, activity over time, as well as new reports released not long ago about engagement and also meetings conducted within the team. And all this can be fun fact for owners, of course, but they can also be part of your adoption strategy. Many organizations I know put a responsibility upon team owners to make sure communication and collaboration is kept within Microsoft Teams. And this report makes it easier for them to acknowledge active users and overall activity. And also, why not do a like most active user of the month award or something like that to make it more fun? Okay, see here, I missed the slide here for some reason. Is not important. I'm just going to do a summary of these steps here before moving on. So I've now gone through all 7 steps for you. And as I told you in the beginning, each one of these steps require more or less time and effort to accomplish. So first step, I talked about making up your plans and strategies about the implementation. Find the correct stakeholders and get the necessary information is very important to the implementation. Creating as much value as possible for your users. Make sure to get the answers to the correct questions relevant to your organization. Conduct the workshops and get to know the why, the short term as well as the long term goals, the pains, the quick wins, and create your adoption strategy based on this information. Next is making sure your plan on how to use Teams as well as your current configuration, that this actually works out for your organization before the full implementation. So conducting a pilot to test everything out is important for many reasons. It's much harder to change and adjust once everything is rolled out everywhere. And users will have a worse experience, hence making adoption harder to accomplish as well. Also, training is affected here based on your ways of working, which often are changed and adjusted during the pilot as well. The key to a successful pilot is finding the users best fitted to participate in the pilot program. And find the best scenarios to try out. If business critical process here once again are part of the implementation strategy, make sure to pilot these. Try out quick wins and find all the things that doesn't work or can improve. And collecting feedback and make adjustments is a huge part of a pilot. Just make it work. Step 3 was communication. And communicating with users from the very start through the implementation is so important in so many ways. It makes users feel more involved. It creates the interest and curiosity needed to make users excited for Microsoft Teams. It also prevents confusion and resistance based upon users feeling forced into using this product. So let users know about Microsoft Teams, why you're implementing it, when and how. Tell them the benefits, including how they themselves can benefit from it in their day-to-day work. Continuing with continuous learning, and as with communication, learning is something that your users should do in several steps all through the implementation. These two, communication and continuous learning, might intertwine, of course, but while communication focuses more on informing about the product and how the implementation and about the implementation itself, training teaches them how and when to use Microsoft Teams in this case. So plan for how you will train your users, when and through which channels training should be conducted. Do you need your own custom-made training material or use existing tools and content out there? Use commonly used channels to reach user with content, as well as classroom trainings, learning management systems, and so on. And use your champions as super users and make learning something that happens on kind of a daily basis. Without proper training, there's a big chance users don't do things the way you intended. They might be confused, give up, resulting in switching back to old behavior and ways of working. And training is not only about the tools and features and stuff like that, but also about helping them change their mindset. People are creatures of habits, as you know, and are used to do their work and tasks in certain ways. Using cloud services is different in many ways to what people are used to and might be hard to grasp and understand. Users can be insecure, storing their data in the cloud, not sure where it actually are stored and how to reach it. And making sure your users gets a better understanding of this are equally important. And yet again, Microsoft Teams is an ever-evolving service, so make sure users are getting continuous information and training even after the implementation. Number 5 was creating a champions program. And as I told you, champions are used to create hype, help out with communication and training, push your users into change of behavior, and collect feedback as well. And by having the right people throughout your organization, gotten the proper training, will make user adoption easier and more effective. Set up a champion team and make sure they communicate and help each other out, as well as forward feedback from the end users, so proper actions can be taken. There are your ears and eyes, not in a kind of a espionage way, but rather making sure users are heard and can make a difference. And they're kind of an extension of your own arm. The second last step was individual workshops. Training for the masses are usually very general, Of course, training can be custom fitted to your own organization, but most times the various departments and business units also have their own way of working. I've seen numerous times users had training but still struggle to fit this into their own team processes and way of working. And by scheduling short workshops with them, with the team responsibilities here, and help them set up their teams in Microsoft Teams, often make a huge difference in them actually start using Teams fully. Ask them about their way of working, their processes and pains. Help them out doing things in Teams and solve their issues if possible. As said before, Teams isn't always the solution either. Also, I see users trying to do the same old things, but now in Microsoft Teams. So this is an opportunity to review their way of working and make it more productive, effective. And yeah, my experience with these workshops are that they are very appreciated and benefits them in many different ways. Kind of just that final kick in to start using Teams for real. The final step was measuring usage, and I covered this not that long ago, so I'll keep this short. Measuring your organization's usage makes sure that you're aware of sudden drops, and in this case, you need to figure out why and do something about it. It could also be encouraging, seeing usage increase over time as well. Depending on results, it also affects how continuous communication and training should be handled as well. Go through the different reports that apply to your rollout, and more often during or shortly after the rollout. Then maybe not as often, but I mean, still you should do this on a regular basis just to keep up. All right, that was all my 7 steps. So thank you so much for attending my session. If you have any questions, just drop over to the breakout room. You see the link there on the slide. I'll be there in a few minutes. If you don't want to do that, you can just reach out to me on Twitter or LinkedIn. And yeah, thank you so much again for attending. Have a great time at Comsverse, and yeah, hopefully talk to you later. Thank you.
Thank you, Adam. Currently, we don't actually have any questions posed. I'll give it a minute or so just to see if anyone's going to pose anything before we close off the session.
Yeah, sure.
As Adam has mentioned, the breakout session will run shortly after this finishes. I've posted the link as an announcement, so people have that as a clickable link to join. So please, if there are any questions, either post them now or head over to the breakout room and have a chat with Adam on a slightly more informal basis. Okay, so given we've got no questions, I'll bring that to an end. And thank you, Adam, and good luck with whatever else you're doing for Converse, and enjoy the rest of the sessions.